Kronos, who the Phoenicians call El, who was a king of the country and subsequently, after his decree, was deified as the star Saturn, had by a nymph of the country named Anobret, an only begotten son, whom, on this account, was called Yedud, the only begotten being still so called among the Phoenicians. And when very great dangers from war had beset the country, he arrayed his son in royal apparel, prepared an altar, and sacrificed him, and then circumcised himself, and made it a custom among the Phoenicians from that day forward. The oldest attested version of Genesis goes back to Sanchuniathon, before the collapse of the Bronze Age, and his writings survived in temples. And according to Philo of Byblos, this is what it says. Philo of Byblos' writings are passed down through Eusebius, and this is all we have left. The first principle of the universe. Dark air with cloud and wind, or rather a blast of cloudy air, and turbid chaos, dark as Erebus, and these were boundless, and for long ages had no limit. But when the wind became enamored of its own parents, and a mixture took place, the connection was called Eros, desire. This was the beginning of all creation of all things, but the wind itself had no knowledge of its own creation. From its connection, Mot was produced, which some say is mud, and others a watery compound. And out of this came every germ of creation, and the generation of the universe. So there were certain animals which had no sensation, and out of them grew intelligent animals, and were called Zophosimon, that is, observers of heaven. And they were formed like the shape of an egg. Also, Mot burst forth into light, and sun and moon and stars and the great constellations. Such was their cosmogony, introducing downright atheism. But let us now see how Sanchuniathon states the generation of animals to have arisen. He says, "And when the air burst into light, both the sea and the land become heated, and thence arose winds and clouds, and very great downpours, and floods of waters of heaven. After the waters are separated and removed from their proper place because of the sun's heat, and all met together again in the air, dashing together one against another, thunderings and lightnings were produced. And at the rattle of the thunder, the intelligent animals, already described, woke up, and were scared at the sound, and began to move both on land, sea, male and female. Such is the theory of the generation of animals. Next, after this, Sanchuniathon adds, these things were found written in the Cosmogony of Tatus, in his commentaries, both from conjectures and from evidences which his intellect discerned and discovered and made clear to us. Tatus is called Thoth by the Egyptians, and Hermes to the Greeks. Next to this, after mentioning the names of the winds Notos and Boreas and the rest, he continues, but these were the first who consecrated the productions of the earth, and regarded them as gods, and worshipped them as being the support of life, both to themselves and to those who were to come after them, and to all before them, and they offered to them drink offerings and libations. These were the notions of worship corresponding to their own weakness and timidity of the soul. Then he says that from the wind Colpius and his wife Bao, which he translates as night, were born Aeon and Protogonus, mortal men, so called, and that Aeon discovered the food obtained from trees, that their offspring were called Ginos and Genea, and inhabited Phoenicia, and that when droughts occurred, they stretched out their hands to heaven towards the sun. For him alone they regarded as God and Lord of heaven, calling him Bilsamen, which in the Phoenician language means Lord of heaven, and in Greek, Zeus. And after this he charges the Greeks with error, saying, "For it is not without cause that we have explained these things in many ways, but in view of later misinterpretations of the names are in history, which the Greeks in ignorance took in a wrong sense, being deceived by the ambiguity of the translation. From Ginos, son of Ion, and Protogonus were begotten again mortal children, whose names are Light, Fire, and Flame. These, says he, discovered fire from rubbing pieces of wood together, and taught the use of it. And they begat sons of surpassing size and stature, whose names were applied to the mountains which they occupied, so that from them were named Cassius, Lavinus, Antilabinus, and Brathi. From these were begotten Memrumus and Hypsiranius, and they got their names from their mothers, as the women in those days had free intercourse with any whom they met. Hypsirianus inhabited Tyre, and contrived huts out of reeds and rushes and papyrus, and he quarreled with his brother Ausuos, who first invented a covering for the body from skins of wild beasts, which he was strong enough to capture. And when furious rains and winds occurred, the trees in Tyre were rubbed against each other and caught fire, and burned down the wood that was there. And Ausuos took a tree, and having stripped off the branches, was first who ventured to embark on the sea, and be consecrated 2 pillars to fire and wind, and worshipped them, and poured libations of blood upon from the wild beasts that he took in hunting. But Hypsiranius and Ausuos were dead. Those were left consecrated staves to them, and year by year worshipped their pillars and kept festivals in their honor. But many years afterwards, from the race of the Ellipsiranius were born Agrius and Halius, the inventors of hunting and fishing, from whom were named huntsmen and fishermen. And from there were born 2 brethren, discoverers of iron and mode of working it. The one whom Chrysor practiced oratory and incantations and divinations, and that he was Hephaestus, and invented the hook, bait, line, and raft, and was the first of all men to make voyage. Wherefore they reverence him also as a god after his death. And he was also called Zeus Melikios. And some say that his brothers invented walls of brick. Afterward there sprang from their race 2 youths, one whom was called Technites, the artificer, and the other Gynos Autochthon, earth-born aboriginal. These devised the mixing of straw with the clay of bricks and drying them in the sun, and moreover invented roofs. From them others were born, one whom was called Agros, and the other agrarios, and or argrots. And of the latter there is in Phoenicia much venerated statue, a shrine drawn by yokes of oxen, and among the people of Byblos he is named the greatest of the gods. These two devised, in addition, 2 houses of courts and enclosures and caves. From them came husbandmen and huntsmen. They are also called Elatae and Titans. From these were born Eminos and Magus, who established villages and sheepfolds. From them came Mesor and Sidak, that is to say, just or righteous. These discovered the use of salt. From Mesor was born Tautus, who invented the first alphabet of the Egyptians, who calls him Thoth, the Greeks Hermes. From Sidak came the Dioscuri, or the Cabieri, or Corybantes, or Samothraces. These, he says, invented the first ship, from having sprung others, who discovered herbs and healing of venomous bites and charms. In their time is born another called Elion, the Most High, and a female named Beruth, and these dwelt in the neighborhoods of Byblos. And from them is born Abigeus, or Autochthon, whom they afterwards called Ouranos, so that from him they named the element above as Ouranos, because of the excellence of its beauty. And he has a sister of the aforesaid parents, who is called Gaia, Earth. And from her, he says, because of her beauty, they call the earth the same name. And their father, the Most High, died in an encounter with wild beasts, and was deified, and his children offered to him libations and sacrifices. And Ouranos, having succeeded his father's rule, takes to himself in marriage his sister Gaia, and gets by her 4 sons: El, who is called Kronos, Baetalus, and Dagon, who is Ceton, and Atlas. Also by other wives, Ouranos begot a numerous progeny, on which account Gaia was angry, and from jealousy began to reproach Ouranos, so that they even separated from each other. But Ouranos, after he had left her, used to come upon her with violence whenever he chose, and consort with her, and go away again. He used to try also to destroy his children by her, but Gaia repelled him many times, having gathered to herself allies. And when Kronos, who was called El, had advanced to manhood, he, with the consulship and help of Hermes Trismegistus, who was his secretary, repelled his father Ouranos, and avenged their mother Gaia. To El are born children, Persephone and Athena. The former died a virgin, but by the advice of Athena and Hermes Trismegistus, El made a sickle and a spear of iron. Then Hermes talked magical words to the allies of El, and inspired them with the desire of fighting against Ouranos on behalf of Gaia. So Kronos, who was called El, and Saturn, inspired them with a desire of fighting against Ouranos on behalf of Gaia. And thus Kronos engaged in war and drove Ouranos from his government, and succeeded that to the kingdom. Also there was taken in battle the beloved concubine of Ouranos, being great with child, who El gave in marriage to Dagon, and in his house she gave birth to the child begotten of Ouranos, and she named him Damaris. After this, El builds a wall around his own dwelling and found the first city, Byblos in Phoenicia. So after this he became suspicious of his own brother Atlas. With the advice of Hermes, threw him into a deep pit and buried him. About this time, the descendants of the Dioscuri put together rafts and ships and made voyages, and being cast ashore near Mount Cassius, consecrated a temple there. And the allies of El, who was called Kronos, were surnamed the Elohim, as these same who were surnamed after El, who would be called the Chroni, after Kronos. And El, having a son Sedidas, dispatched him with his own sword, because he regarded him with suspicion and deprived him of life, thus becoming the murderers of his own son. In like manner, he cut off the head of his daughter, so that all the gods were dismayed at the disposition of El. But at this time, Ouranos, being in banishment, secretly sends his maiden daughter Astarte, with two of her sisters, Ea and Dione, to slay El by craft. But El caught them, and though they were his sisters, made them his wedded wives. And when Ouranos knew it, he sent Imarmene and Hora with the other allies on an expedition against Kronos. And these El won over to his side and kept with him. Further, he says, the god Ouranos devised the Batilia, having contrived to put life into stones. In El there were born of Astarte 7 daughters, Titanides or Artemides, and again the same that were born of Rhea 7 sons, of whom the youngest was deified at birth, and of Dione females, and of Astarte again 2 males, Desire and Love. And Dagon, after he discovered corn and the plow, was called Zeus Aerotrios, and of the Titans united to Sidak, who was called the Righteous, gives birth to Asclepius or Ashmun, the 8th son. In Perea there also was born to El 3 sons, Kronos, named after his father, Zeus Belus, and Apollo. In their time are born Pontus, Typhon, Nereus, father of Pontus and son of Belus. And from Pontus is born Sidon, who, from the exceeding sweetness of her voice, was first to invent the musical song, and Poseidon. And to Damaris is born Melcarthus, who is called Hercules. Then again Ouranos makes war against Pontus, and after revolting attaches himself to Damaris, and Damaris attacks Pontus, but Pontus puts him to flight, and Damaris vowed an offering if he should escape. And then, in the 32nd year of his power and kingdom, El, that is Kronos, also known as Saturn, having waylaid his father Ouranos in an inland spot, got him into his hands, emasculates him near some fountains and rivers. There Ouranos was deified, and he breathed his last. The blood from his wounds dropped into the fountains and in the waters and in the rivers, and the spot is pointed out to this day. That is to say, the story of El, and such are the glories of the mode of life, so vaunted among the Greeks, of the men in the days of Kronos, whom they also affirm to have been the first golden race of articulate speaking men, that blessed happiness of the olden time. But Astarte, the greatest goddess, and Zeus Damaris, and Adonis, king of gods, reigned over the country with the consent of El. And Astarte set the head of a bull upon her own head as a mask of royalty. and in traveling around the world she found a star that had fallen from the sky, which she took up and consecrated in the holy island of Tyre. And the Phoenicians say that Astarte is Aphrodite and Venus. El, going around the world, gives the kingdom of Attica to his own daughter Athena. But on the occurrence of a pestilence and mortality, El offers his only begotten son as a whole burnt offering to his father Ouranos, his son Yehud. And he circumcises himself, and compelling his allies to do the same. And not long after, another of his sons by Rhea, named Muth, having died, he deifies him, and the Phoenicians call him Thanatos, or death, and Pluto. And after this, El gave the city of Byblos to the goddess Baltis, which is also called Dione, and Beirutis, to Poseidon, and the Cabiri, and Agorote, and Helios, who is also consecrated the remains of Pontus at Beirut. But before this god, Tautis, who is called Thoth, imitated the features of the gods who were his companions, El and Dagon and the rest, and gave form to the sacred characters of the letters, 4 eyes in front and behind, but 2 of them quietly closed, and upon his shoulders 4 wings, 2 spread for flying and 2 folded. And the symbol meant that El could see when he was asleep and sleep while waking, and similarly, in the case of the wings, that he flew while at rest and was at rest when flying. But to each of the other gods he gave 2 wings upon the shoulders, as meaning that they accompanied El in his flight. And to El himself, again, he gave 2 wings upon his head, one representing all ruling mind and one sensation. And when El came into the south country, he gave all of Egypt to Thoth, that it might be his royal dwelling place. And these things, he said, were recorded first by Sidoc's 7 sons, the Cabiri, and their 8th brother, Eshmun, known as Asclepius, as the god Thoth commanded them. All these stories, Thebion, who was the first hierophant of all the Phoenicians from the beginning, allegorized and mixed up the physical and cosmical phenomena, and delivered to the prophets, who celebrated the orgies and inaugurated the mysteries, and they, proposing to increase their vain pretensions from every source, handed them on to their successors and to their foreign visitors. One of these, Osiris, the inventor of the 3 letters, brother Kana, who was first to have been named the Phoenix. Then afterwards Philo of Byblos adds, the Greeks, surpassing all in genius, appropriated most of the earliest stories, and then variously decked them out with ornaments of tragic phrase, and adorned them in every way with the purpose of charming by the pleasant fables. Hence Hesiod and the celebrated cyclical poets framed theogonies of their own, and battles of the giants and battles of the titans, and castrations, and with these fables, as they traveled about, they conquered and drove out the truth. But our ears, having grown up in familiarity with their fictions, and being for long ages preoccupied, guard as a trust the mythology which they received, just as I said at the beginning. And this mythology, being aided by time, has made its hold difficult for us to escape from, so that the truth is thought to be nonsense, but the spurious narrative truth. Let these suffice as quotations from the writings of Sanchuniathon, translated by Philo of Byblos, and approved as true by the testimony Porphyry the philosopher. The same author in History of the Jews further writes thus concerning El. Tautus, who the Egyptians call Thoth, excelled in wisdom among the Phoenicians, and was the first to rescue the worship of the gods from their ignorance of vulgar, and arrange it in the same order of intelligent experience. Many generations after him, a god, Sormeblos and Thuro, whose name was changed to Eusarthus, brought the light of theology of Thoth, which had been hidden and overshadowed by allegories. Porphyry then adds, "It was a custom of the ancients in great crises of danger for the rulers of a city or nation, in order to avert a common ruin, to give up the most beloved of their children for sacrifice as a ransom to avenging daemons, and those who were thus given up were sacrificed with the mystical rites of the Phoenicians." Kronos, who the Phoenicians call El, who was a king of the country and subsequently, after his decree, was deified as the star Saturn, had by a nymph of the country named Anobret an only begotten son, whom on this account was called Yedud, the only begotten being still so called among the Phoenicians. And when very great dangers from war had beset the country, he arrayed his son in royal apparel, prepared an altar, and sacrificed him, and then circumcised himself, and made it a custom among the Phoenicians from that day forward. Porphyry then talks about how the same author, Philo of Byblos, in his translation from Sanchuniathon about the Phoenician alphabet, says concerning the reptiles and venomous beasts, which contribute no good service to mankind, but work death and destruction to any in whom they inject their incurable and fatal poison. This also he describes, saying a word for as follows: "The nature of the dragon and of serpents Thoth himself regarded as divine, and so again after him did the Phoenicians and Egyptians, for this animal was declared by him to be of all reptiles most full of breath and fiery, in consequence of which it also exerts an unsurpassable swiftness by means of its breath, without feet and hands or any other of the external members by which the other animals make their movements. It also exhibits forms of various shapes, and in progress makes spiral leaps as swift as it chooses. It is also most long-lived, and its nature is to be put off its old skin, and so not only to grow young again, but also to assume a larger growth, and after it has fulfilled its appointed measure of age, it is self-consumed in the manner as Thoth himself has set down in his sacred books, for which reason this animal has been also adopted in temples and the mystic rites. We have spoken more fully about it in the memoirs entitled Ethiopia, in which we prove that it is immortal and self-consumed, as I stated before, for this animal does not die by a natural death, but only is struck by a violent blow. The Phoenicians call it the good daemon. In like manner, the Egyptians also surname it Kneph, and they add to the head of a hawk because of the hawk's activity. Apius also, who is called among them the chief hierophant and sacred scribe, whose work is translated into Greek by Arius of Heracleopolis, speaks in an allegory, word for word, as follows: "The first and most divine being is a serpent, with the form of a hawk, extremely graceful, which whenever he opened his eyes, filled all with light in its original birthplace, but if he shut his eyes, darkness came on." Epius here intimates that he is also a fiery substance by saying he shone through, for to shine through is peculiar to light. From the Phoenicians, Pharisaids also took the first ideas of his theology concerning the god by him Ophion, and concerning Ophionade, of whom we shall speak again. Moreover, the Egyptians, describing the world from the same idea, engrave a circumference of circle of the color of the sky in fire, and a hawk-shaped serpent stretches across the middle of it, and the whole shape is like that of the Greek letter theta, representing the circle of the world and signifying the serpent which connects it in the middle of the good daemon. Zoroaster, the Magus, in the sacred collection of Persian records, says in express words, "And God has the head of a hawk. He is the first, incorruptible, eternal, uncreated, without parts, most unlike all else, the controller of all good, who cannot be bribed, the best of all the good, the wisest of all the wise, and he is also father of good laws and justice, self-taught, natural, perfect, and wise, and the sole author of the sacred power of nature." Zoroaster is the first of all the mortals to oppose El, who is called Kronos. The same also is said of him by Astanes in the book entitled Octatuk. From Thoth, as is said above, all received their impulse towards physiological systems, and having built temples, they consecrated in the shrines the primary element represented by serpents, and in their honor celebrated festivals and sacrifices and mystic rites, regarding them as the greatest gods and the rulers of the universe. So much concerning serpents. Such then is the character of the theology of the Phoenicians and the Egyptians. Let me know what you guys think of this. First of all, what did you guys think about El giving up his only begotten son as a burnt offering and then circumcising himself? You notice anything about that passage? Does it remind you of anything? Abraham, Isaac. And do you guys think this story influences that story? Write in the comments what you guys think. And thanks for watching. If you liked it, hit the like button and share this video.